Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video. And in today's video, I'm going to be giving my reaction for Max Holloway, his fight against Dustin Poirier as he won via unanimous decision. If you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like video if you do indeed like the video, and feel free to join the Patreon as well. I'm always plugging it at the moment. The link is in the description. You can request for £5 any kind of combat sporting related content that you'd like to see me do, and I will try my best to do it. There's been quite a few videos that have already been put out which are down to requests from the Patreon, so I appreciate all the support that's it's had so far, and it does really support the channel. And so yeah, thank you very much, and let's get straight into this one. So of course, this was Dustin Poirier's retirement. This was UFC 318, and to be fair, the fact of a lack of on paper stacked card, this kind of did live up to it a bit. I mean, there was some very good fights. Of course, this one lived up to the hype in my opinion. Of course, there was also Kevin Holland's fight versus Rodriguez. That was a great fight as well, and the fight in which actually did win fight of the night was, of course, Marvin Vettori versus Brendan Allen. Of course, Dustin Poirier and Max weren't too keen upon that, but like I say, it was a good card in the end, and I feel like that's what really matters. I mean, if yes, on paper it's not going to be the most stacked, the fights that are on there need to deliver, and especially for a BMF title, this fight needed to deliver, and it did. And I mean, from the very get-go, Dustin Poirier walking out with Lil Wayne was cool. It seemed like they, had that arranged, and again, like I say, that was a cool thing. And the fact that he then went on to give the belt to Max was a cool thing as well. And I think that the BMF title should continually have that novelty of having a different person other than Dana, issuing the belt each time. I think that's what adds to, what is a bit of a novelty belt in the first place. I think that's what adds to it a little bit more. And again, that was cool. It was a bit of a shame to see that Lil Wayne didn't actually, sing or rap, I suppose, to an extent, with Dustin Poirier whilst they were alongside each other. I feel like that would have been quite an iconic moment, but it seems like they just don't allow that in the UFC, which is a bit of a shame. But, either way, it was still a kind of big moment, his walkout, where you could feel the tension there, and you could feel, that kind of emotion there at the same time. Of course, this was Dustin Poirier's final walkout and everything like that. And like I say, for the fight, it definitely did live up to expectations, and I think the BMF belt always has to do that, and it definitely should, in my opinion, be mandatory for any fighters who fight for the BMF title to go toe to toe at the end of the fight and to point to the ground. Now that Max Holloway has set that bar with, of course, him knocking out Gaethje, I feel like that bar, that standard's been set now, and it should be maintained, and it should be kept, because at the end of the day, that's what the fans are here to see. That's what they're, paying the money to see, this excitement from a BMF title. And I mean, the fight as a whole was a pretty hectic fight. I mean, they, of course, did the centre of the ring at the end of the fight, which is what the fans are there to see, and what they were, expecting. I think at the same time, it also creates that interest for the fans, because the fans are willing and kind of wanting, I suppose, to an extent, the fight to go the full distance, because they want to see what happens in them final few seconds. It keeps them so locked in, which is why, again, I think it should be mandatory. But Dustin was able to jump his Gilly, which of course was the iconic moment in which every Poirier fan wanted to see in his final fight. Poirier, of course, was dropped early in round one. Max dominated that first round, and then Max, after dominating the second round and seemingly, almost having Poirier kind of out of there to an extent, was then dropped, and then, the momentum flipped, and that was, a dramatic moment, and that was what made the fight very entertaining. Then, of course, Poirier kind of grew into the fight a bit more and was there to always kind of land a jab after Max was continuously outlanding him in exchanges, and like I say, was having a lot of success outlanding him. Poirier, like I say, was always there to make sure that he wasn't getting too greedy, and like I say, was landing the jab and was landing a few powerful, significant punches, especially later on into the fight. And then, Max inevitably was too quick, too fast, and too creative in his strikes. I think he did make Dustin question himself, especially early on in the fight, and inevitably these were all the attributes in which I said would be that bit too much for Dustin. And I think, to be fair, this fighter showcased that it was a good time for Dustin to kind of bow out. I think it wasn't a bad performance at all. Like I say, I think he really grew into the fight, and after scoring his own knockdown, he was then having success into the third, the fourth, the fifth round. But inevitably, Max was, having much more success in the first or second round. That was very dominating by Max. And again, I think Dustin wasn't washed and isn't completely out of it, but maybe in a couple more fights, he definitely would have been stepping down the levels for him to, be able to pick up wins and stuff like that. And I'm sure at this point in his career, he didn't really want that. And I definitely think, this was a good send off for him. And I think the fans really gave him the respect he deserves, and the fans really came out to support him. And that's inevitably what you want to be seeing for a retirement fight. That's why seemingly the UFC put so much kind of attention onto him, retiring, because the fans were coming out to see that. And again, like I say, I think it was definitely a good send off, but I think at the same time the UFC was definitely happy to see that it wasn't him who won, because if Dustin would have won and then gone on to retire, first of all, he would have retired with the BMF belt, which would have left it vacant, and that would have made it more difficult perhaps to match it up with fighters. And then at the same time, it would have put Max Holloway in a position where he's having to fight the contenders coming up. Instead, he is still in a pretty tricky position, because there was a bit of a narrative built with a Topuria possibility of a rematch, just because Topuria said that, I believe he said on Twitter that the BMF belt was still kind of rightfully his. Of course, he bought his own BMF belt after the win of his against Max Holloway, and then was going around kind of flaunting the fact that he had them two belts. And then there was, like I say, him making that tweet creates a bit of a narrative there. I mean, I don't think fans are really excited or really wanting to see a Topuria versus Holloway rematch, but Holloway was saying a bit which seemed to, like I say, fuel that narrative a little bit. He seemed like he was, saying that it was a waste of money and it was a bit weird that he did that to Poirier and things like that. So, I think Holloway is trying to do whatever he can to be able to really push a fight, a rematch with Topuria, because of course Topuria is the champion, but it's a really difficult position for Holloway to be in my opinion, because he's beaten Gaethje, he's just fought Poirier. Then otherwise, I mean, the Topuria fight just doesn't make sense at the moment. Sarukian's going in for a title shot and possibly might be willing to give Holloway a fight. I don't know. Oliveira's probably going to be out for a while, but Holloway did also say that he would be willing to fight Oliveira, so possibly that could be a fight that could make sense. But I don't know if, like I say, what's happening with Oliveira, if he's going to be wanting to take quite a bit of time out after, of course, getting knocked out so badly. And then again, you look around, there is some exciting fights. I think a him versus a Dan Hooker fight again would make sense. But other than that, realistically, there isn't a tremendous amount of good fights, in my opinion, that really do make sense. I mean, if he was to go on to fight Gaethje again, it would be a good fight. But Gaethje, the fact that Holloway was dominating so much in that first fight, again, that just doesn't really make sense. A Paddy Pimblett one, it seems like Paddy's getting fast tracked to the title. Possibly he could take a little stop off, try and pick up the BMF belt, but I would feel like perhaps fans would maybe protest that a little bit and say that Paddy doesn't deserve to fight for a BMF title at this point in his career just yet. So, like I say, it's a real tricky position for Holloway to be in, and I feel like he's kind of acknowledged that and accepted that at the same time. But he's definitely, cemented himself as a BMF champion and as the BMF champion. Realistically, I mean, you kind of look about and see the other BMF champions that have been. You've got your Nate Diaz and your Masvidals and fighters like that. But at this point, Max Holloway, the fact that he's been able to go on to now defend his BMF title, and the fact of course, everything that he did versus Gaethje, the fact that he still went on and wanted to put on a good performance here against Dustin. He is, in my opinion, a true BMF champion, and I think he does definitely kind of describe what a BMF champion is and really does live it up for the fans. And so that's why, of course, he is such a fan favourite. And, that was a highlight moment for him, but also a great send off at the same time. It's still for Dustin Poirier. And it will be sad to see no more Dustin Poirier campaigning in the division, because I think he was still always a strong fighter and had so many great fights and always a strong name. I feel like the lightweight division is poorer without him in it. But, the sport moves on. Will we see Dustin Poirier perhaps go into boxing? Maybe. I mean, perhaps if he gets itchy knuckles and things like that, it wouldn't surprise me if perhaps he gets in a little exhibition fight at some point. Maybe that would, maybe that could happen. Maybe a little bit of dirty boxing or bare knuckle boxing. But, if he wants to sail off into the sunset with his wife and kids, and again, at the same time, no discredit to him, and he's been amazing all that he's done in his career. And so yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.